on this edition of the Self-Publishing Show.
I'm going to drop a little bit of hot truth here. Writing isn't the only game. As much as we mythicize it and say that being a full-time writer is a goal, it is for a lot of people, but it's not for everyone.
Publishing is changing. No more gatekeepers. No more barriers. No one standing between you and your readers. Do you want to make a living from your writing? Join indie bestseller Mark Dawson and first-time author James Blatch as they shine a light on the secrets of self-publishing success. This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
Hello and welcome to the Self-Publishing Show. This is James Blatch.
And Mark Dawson. Hello.
Hello. First thing we're going to do is to welcome our new Patreon supporter for this week. It is Kristen Shum from Arizona in the United States of America. Welcome, Kristen. Thank you very much indeed. She's been to patreon.com/self-publishing show to help support the show and get access to lots of goodies, including a chance to be selected for our book laboratory. Our book lab episode is coming up soon. The selection will be made this week. Current selections are under consideration. Good. Mark, we have had a good week. I got mentioned on quite a big author's newsletter yesterday. So I sat there this morning. I didn't know this was happening, case, and I said to Jill, "It's happening, Jill. It's happening. It's taking off spontaneously, like I thought it would." I sold 53 books yesterday, which is I'm normally selling 15 to 20 max a day, with Facebook ads pushing them and making a small loss, like £4 I think the day before, and suddenly sold 53 books and had 4,000 page reads and was in profit by some way. And it's all happening. But it turned out there's this author who has like gazillions of readers, and he'd mentioned me on his newsletter. And who was that author, Mark?
Robert Harris?
Wasn't Robert. I don't think Robert has a newsletter.
Stephen King?
Have. I think Stephen King just looks out the window and sells his books now. But it was Mark Dawson.
No. It was me, yes. I mentioned you in I do a monthly newsletter, and I have a kind of a what I'm reading section. So it's not prominent, but it's like a little kind of, what I'm reading, what I'm listening to, what I'm watching. And you were the what I'm reading this week or this month, and I saw 220 clicks. I think that link got, and selling maybe 40-ish of those. So not bad, 20%-ish, 25% maybe conversion rate, not too shabby.
Yeah, and of course some people might be on Kindle Unlimited, so
absolutely, and others won't will click later, they won't all have clicked already. Had a few emails from readers as well saying that they were looking forward to reading the book as well, so I apologized and tried to prepare them for the shock. But
well, I'm up to 18 reviews on the UK one, and they're positive. The vast majority are 5-star, 3 4-star, and 1 3 3 4-star, 1 3-star. All the ones who've left a written review, I think, are all a 5-star, apart from one is 4-star. It's a very good review, the 4-star, but I think he's also quite American and struggled a little bit with some of the British language, which is fine. He also said that's part and parcel of the adventure of a British book, a glimpse into a world. You don't really think about it too much until you start writing books that are going to be read, the American-British thing. And it's an interesting one. We've talked about it a bit before, and I know authors do grind their teeth a bit about this because what you don't want is somebody not being able to navigate your book. But on the other hand, it would be very odd for, John Milton, or in my case, 2 RAF officers, middle class British in the 60s, to use any kind of Americanisms would be wrong. So it's striking that balance and not being too British. And I guess if you're an American author and looking at an international audience, although it's a much smaller thing for them, not being too American. How do you do it? You're British.
Yeah, well, I think we have mentioned before, the kind of the compromise I've reached is that if, say it's Milton, who is, as you say, is English, if we're in his point of view, he wouldn't use, no spellings will be, they're all kind of English spellings. So colour has a U, for example. So that doesn't matter what point of view we're in, it will always be British spelling. And I've never really had a problem with that. A few people say he can't spell now and again, but that's fine. And the choice of words, so the obvious example is parking lot or car park or flashlight and torch. Lots of those kinds of trash can, rubbish bin, garbage, rubbish. There are lots and lots and lots of words you need to think about. If I'm in Milton's point of view, he would always refer to a car park. He wouldn't, if it's Milton pulled into the car park, it wouldn't be parking lot. If I'm in an American character's point of view, my stories tend to be mostly from Milton's point of view, but there will be sections from other characters, chapters, and in those cases, if they are American, they will use American words. So spelling's always the same, always English, but they would put their rubbish or put their trash into the garbage bin. They wouldn't put their rubbish into the dustbin. So that's fairly natural now.
So this is not just in speech. This is in their POV, and a scene that's from their POV, your description that you're writing as an author would say trash and garbage can because it's their POV.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and that's worked pretty well. I mean, it's taken me a long time to get to that kind of point where I feel comfortable with it, but I don't really get complaints anymore on that front. I think readers... Well, readers, if they're reading the latest books in the series, they're probably not new to the series. They will have got used to it by now. So I don't really have any issues with that now.
Yeah. Well, the reviewer who left that note for me wasn't complaining. I think they were just saying it was part of writing and reading a novel that was British. And I also think, by the way, that 4s and 5 stars. Because I think Jill feels quite proprietorial. I should do over this novel, saying, well, why do you think it got 4? And I said, well, because 5-star, some people reserve that for something that's absolutely exceptional, and something that's very good can be 4-star. And everyone has their own way of allocating stars. You can't, as an author, you can't look, well, it's 3-star for what's wrong with my book. It's not like that.
No, you absolutely. I detect review obsession going on here.
No,
which is,
I only look at it 3 or 4 times an hour. Not that much.
Exactly. No, I think the reason I say that is exactly how many 4s, 5s, and 3s you've got. I don't know. No. I have no idea. And I don't even bother anymore. I don't look anymore. But it's normal to, as you get started, that will be one of the things that you can't resist looking at and analysing and over-analysing. But people give 3 stars, and that's a really good review for them. It really doesn't matter. If you had like 20 1-star reviews and no 5-star reviews, then I would think there is a problem that needs to be addressed. But that isn't the case. So I don't think you need to worry about it too much. Yeah.
Anyway, I'm just pleased we're here talking about my published book and the vagaries of being published, rather than when's your book coming out, James. So that's the main thing. I will keep people in touch with my strategy from time to time. Obviously, book 2's in the pipeline. And I'm running Facebook ads to about £40 a day now, scaled them down a little bit, and running $5 and £5 a day on Amazon ads. I did make a profit in April, which obviously included the launch and the pre-orders, and we'll see what happens in May. But at the moment, it's about visibility, people reading my book, talking to each other about it, getting a name out there as far as I can within a sphere as an author, and using that platform for books 2 and 3. So I am expecting it not to be commercially successful as one book. Something I talked to Jo Penn about actually this week on her podcast. I don't know when that's going out, in a couple of weeks, on the Creative Penn podcast. I was her guest there, and she said it's one of the more common things she finds with first authors, their unrealistic expectations of their first book and feeling deflated and crushed, and maybe not going on to books 2 and 3 because it didn't make a profit. Whereas I've got the benefit of working alongside you, being ingratiated into this world. Is that the word? I don't know. And I'm aware of the limitations of one book. I'm aware the commercial, not necessarily a necessity in all cases, but it definitely is the model that works, is to have books 2, 3, 4, and 5. And it's almost like starting a new business in the old way, where you'd say year 1 you'd invest and lose money. Year 2 you'd look to break even. Year 3 you'd look to move into profit. And you can almost say that about 3 books, I think, when you get going. It's just that everything you spend on book 1, even if it doesn't make you money, is an investment in that pattern. So I think
absolutely.
Stick to the long term.
No, I'm seeing that. I've mentioned before that I trying to find a way to show people how advertising works is difficult for me, because I in the US and the UK, I've been doing this for a while. I've got lots of readers. I'm not a newbie, so it's quite difficult to demonstrate that this works. So the ways we've been able to get around that is Fuse is obviously a good example. That's brand new. Effectively, those are new books that weren't selling before. So you'll be able to advertise to improve the sales on those. We've done that with 2 different authors now. A third one coming soon, we think. But then the other thing, obviously, I for Germany, I was new in Germany a couple of years ago. I'm not really new now, so those books are selling really strongly now, but I am new in France. So one of the things I've been trying over the last 2 or 3 weeks is I've started to concentrate a bit more on advertising in France, and quite frustrating. I tried to get Amazon to price match the first. I've got 3 books. The Beatrix series is translated into French, and I've tried to get them to price match the first one to 0. So I put it to 0 on Kobo, told Amazon, look, come on, can you match the price, please? And they did for about 2 days each time, and then it went back to full price, which is really annoying when I've started to get Facebook ads working really well to serve, making reference to a book that's free. Of course, the book isn't free. They click on the ad and suddenly it's $4.99. So that's really irritating. So I've basically given up trying to match that. I think there's a glitch. I think I understand from Amazon there's a bit of a glitch on the French store in terms of price matching. So I've dropped the price to 99 cents in France, and have been spending $25 a day on just driving a lot of traffic to that first book. Definitely making a loss on that, but then keeping an eye on what's happening with the rest of the book 2 and book 3 and print as well. And I think those books, they look like they may be profitable. I'm not entirely sure yet. It's a bit too early to say, but they seem profitable. If I can get France going as well, then I'll start thinking about, is it now worth... I'm nowhere near this decision yet because it's also quite expensive, but is it worth getting the Milton books translated into French? 5,000-6,000 euros per book probably. So it's a decision that you have to make, feeling reasonably confident that they will work. And then if I can get that model to work, I'll go to Spanish as well. So I've got those books translated into Spanish too. So I'll then try and push them in Spanish. So if I can get Germany, France, and Spain going, that could be, well, potentially, if I can get them even to a half of where I am with Germany, that's going to be significant. So watch this space. I'll keep people posted on whether I can get the French to buy on Amazon, which is a bit of a challenge.
Yeah. So it's at amazon.fr. I was reading an exchange on our Facebook group, the community group, the other day about amazon.au, that actually it isn't widely used according to the people commenting in Australia, and they use amazon.com and have the book delivered. Yeah. But I hadn't realised that.
Just looking at the French store now, De Sang-Froid, which is the first of the Beatrix books, it's 785 in the store at the moment.
Okay.
So that's gone from telephone numbers to sub 1,000, and reviews coming in too. So that's we'll see. It's definitely signs of life, which I wasn't sure I'd be able to do in France, and the second book, which is full price, 1,500 now. So starting to. I'll keep an eye on that rank and sales and see if that read-through generates, which there's no reason why I wouldn't.
It's clever how I just clicked onto it. It was in French briefly for a second, then switched over to English. It obviously grabs the equivalent text.
All the main browsers will translate web pages now.
Oh, this is a translation, is it? Okay. I wondered if Amazon had picked up the description from the...
No, you're on Chrome, are you?
Yes. Yeah. No,
Chrome will translate it, yeah. Which is very useful for people like me trying to understand German reviews, given that I don't speak a lick of it. So,
I'm going to read the reviews now, see what the French think of your books. Presumably most of the reviews are just a shrug and a goal.
I've got 17th of April, superb. I think that's, I think even I can translate that. Superb, lever, triste, lever. No, I'm not going to do a terrible job butchering the French language, but there we go.
Plot
and then, of course, there's a couple of 1-stars, so it happens to all of us. There we go.
Yeah,
so,
of course, Plot well and storyline. Too bad the author's other series are not available in French. There you go.
Well, watch this space, my French friend.
I had a great comment in a review this week about one of my saying, because I put a little taste of what the next book's going to be about, the American exchange pilot, his story from 3 years before in Edwards in the States. And they said, a little disappointed because they want to hear more about another character, Susie, who's in the book. That's a great sort of fillip for an author to hear that somebody's that engaged in your character that they want them to have their own book. And of course, book 3, why not Susie?
Absolutely.
Okay, right, so let's move on. We have a great author interview today with Nathan Van Coops, my friend who lives over in St. Petersburg in Florida. He writes time travel books. I've just read one of his books, very enjoyable indeed. Sort of time travel noir, I would say this book is. It's a very atmospheric writing that Nathan does. He creates this world where the time travel is mechanical, slightly clunky, and very believable, despite all the difficulties there always are when you introduce time travel and people asking about the changing the past and all the rest of it. I thought Nathan's done a really cracking job of that. He's also somebody who's very happy to have a full-time job and write part-time, and that's a balance he enjoys. He's not necessarily somebody who's clamoring to quit his 9 to 5 and become a solo author, and I think that's an important thing, an important position that's completely valid and something we should celebrate and talk about as well. So here is Nathan Van Coops, and then Mark and I will be back for a quick chat.
This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
Nathan Van Coops, welcome to the Self-Publishing Show. Delighted to have you with us. So you
Good
and
to be here.
Yeah, well, you and I go back a little bit, and I recently read one of your books. I don't always, obviously we have guests on. I do probably, you're my second or third interview this week, and I just don't get a chance to read everybody's books, unfortunately. It isn't time. But coincidentally, I have just read one of your books and enjoyed it very much indeed. So time travel, it felt to me like, did I get that right? Time travel detective noir. It felt like a kind of...
You did. You nailed it. That was
40s
exactly what I was going for.
Slightly cynical, detective, and the mole, not the mole, is that the right word? The kind of female femme fatale victim. Yeah. And yes, there's this time travel. And it's such a feature of your books. I would like to talk about that. I will do some tin pot psychology and work out why it is you want to travel in time. But anyway, we'll leave that for the moment. And let's start, for those of you who aren't familiar with your books and who Nathan Van Coops is, why don't you fire away and give us a little bit of your how you got to here? Sure.
Yeah, I've been writing for quite a few years now. The first book came out in 2013, which feels like the beginning of time now because of how much we've learned since then. But that's around the time I was getting started. I like you, I spent many years on the first book. I think at least 4 years putzing around with it, and finally got an accountability group and some other writers who were also working on novels. And that really made a huge difference. I went from having 8 chapters that I was walling around with to having a finished book in the next 6 months, just because I had accountability.
Wow.
And so that was a big early lesson.
And was that more than just saying you got your words done, but also bouncing ideas off each other to help you along? Or?
Both. Yeah. They were also talented writers. I was very fortunate with who I got teamed with, and they weren't people that were going to just, cut me down unnecessarily. They were actually very well learned people and excellent writers in their own right. So it was good feedback, and just the action of having to have new pages to show every couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Because if there was 3 of us, so if we passed our pages around and one person didn't do the work, someone was sitting there with nothing to read.
Yeah.
So that was, obviously no good, no bueno. So.
And what was your first book? Which one was that?
First one was called In Times Like These.
Okay.
And, I wrote the book that, they tell you never to write. It's just sort of a vague allusion to things like what your life would be if something was different, like time travel.
Yeah.
So I made all the early mistakes, based characters on people I knew, things like that. And it was a lot of fun.
Is that a mistake though? We have to draw from life to write our characters, don't we?
It ended up being a mistake for me because of the fact that I knew them so well in my head. I knew who these people were. I knew their characteristics, what they were like, and their personalities, that when I went to transpose them onto the page, they were already fully fleshed out in my head. Whereas later on, second book and other books I've written since, I've predominantly stuck to fictional characters that I had to flesh out on the page so that the reader always knew exactly what I knew about them.
Yeah.
And there might be things in my head that never made it on the page about them, but for the most part, I had to develop them there. They had to show up on the page. Whereas that first book, I think some people were like, well, I feel like there's these people blend together. This I don't quite understand who this person is. And in my mind, I'm like, of course, they're totally different people. But that's just, I think that was a mistake that I learned from early on, right out of the gate. And then since then, I recommend just using your imagination.
Yeah. Forming them entirely yourselves.
Yeah.
And time travel was a feature of that first book. Has time travel been a feature of every novel you've written?
Not every novel, no. But I do always have some element of the fantastical in it. Not necessarily fantasy, but some sort of science fiction element. And I sort of bill myself as writing science fiction adventure. And that's the broader genre that I fall under, because there is always something other about it. Not fantasy, there's never any magic. There's usually some sort of science base, but I have written an alternate history series. I have one called Kingdom of Engines, which basically proposes that what if knights didn't ride horses? What if they drove cars?
Right.
And it's sort of a fun alternate history mashup where if the internal combustion engine was invented, but guns weren't, and we still had a feudal system. And it's just a fun time. But those are the only two leaps you have to take. Usually you just have to take, one or two leaps in my books, and then the rest is pretty science-based.
Yeah.
If those things were true, then these other things could also be true.
Yeah, and the novel I read, Time of Death, the time travel element is first of all, it's quite a practical thing in the book. There's no magic. It's a kind of thing that he could get wrong occasionally, and there's dangers to it. And it's also, I think, woven in very seamlessly to the book. He just goes ahead and does it. But it's a fairly traditional murder mystery with a bit of kind of romance and, as I say, noir feel to it. But I really liked the way that the time travel was integral to how the crime was committed in the end. Oh, it's a bit of a spoiler, but not a massive spoiler. Yeah. But it's integral to all the events in the book. And in the end, he was probably the only detective who could have solved it. And even he struggled through parts of it.
I think that's one of the keys. I'm learning so much because this is a big genre shift for me, going from writing science fiction adventure to now I'm writing, mystery, science fiction mystery. And when you add that mystery element, there are established tropes, especially when you get into the PI detective.
Yeah.
This is a classic character that we know and love from, Dashiell Hammett and all these other
Raymond
people
Chandler,
who paved the way. Raymond Chandler, they've paved the way pretty clearly, and we have genre expectations as a reader. So you want to include those. And so for Time of Death, my main emphasis was to write a PI detective mystery with time travel, not to write a time travel book with a mystery element. And I was very focused about that, of like, who is my primary audience? And I was very specifically targeting mystery thriller readers rather, not time travel readers specifically. I knew the time travel readers were going to come on board.
Yeah. And I think you were definitely successful in that. And, but there is a downside to this slight mashing of genres. It would be, and I think we've had this conversation off air over a beer probably. I think that it would be easier for you commercially to market a book that if it was much more of a just Raymond Chandler without time travel, or potentially a more fantastical time travel book, because they're two fairly distinct genres that allow the right imagery and slogans. What you've created is a great genre, really entertaining, but like all of those ones that falls between genres, a more challenging marketing effort, I would say.
Absolutely. And this is something that I do to myself consistently, which I have never learned from this mistake. I have learned from it, but I do it anyway.
But it's a choice. It's not a mistake. It's what you want to do as well.
It is. I am most fascinated at the intersection of those Venn diagrams. I liked, like with my modern medieval, like I liked muscle cars and I liked sword fights. And I'm like, well, is there a world where those two could combine? And then I wrote that world.
Of course there is.
And people that actually take the leap love the book. Trying to market it is a bear. Absolutely. Like people look at that like, what on earth is this?
Yeah.
But it's structurally, it's one of my best written novels. Those two novels, I think, are some of my best work in terms of structural writing and writing just sort of a blockbuster pace. And I'm very, very proud of them. However, I know that they will never sell as well as the time travel stuff because it's more specific. Time travel hits certain tropes. Like you said, the reason why I have a career right now at all is because I got some things right with that very first book. I may have made other mistakes with it, but I got the time travel elements down and I developed a system that was practical. And I developed a world that people could believe in. They came in, the ones who love that story, who love all the rest of my books, like it because I thought through the time travel and I didn't just sweep stuff under the rug. And I was very careful with it. And that's partly because I spent so many years mulling it over in advance. But that long term has probably been the most effective thing in my career, is that I took that time in advance to really think through it. And I didn't just cover over the plot holes that most time travel books have. because I knew that I was always frustrated as a reader when people just did things that didn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And I think that one choice early on to not do that got me a lot of readers.
Yeah. Although it does require, you've got to have some license for time travel. It does require a little bit of leap. I think your reader is prepared to come along with you some of the way. You just can't make it really bad.
And science fiction readers are very picky about where they'll draw that line.
Yes.
It's funny. Like they will always pick a bone with you somewhere. For me, I don't factor in the amount of air that you're displacing when you time travel from one place to another. And we were existing in a fluid. And sometimes people are like, oh, well, have you factored in bugs? You know, like what happened if there's like a bug there? Like that's how granular they get.
Yeah.
And so there was, I think early on in the first series, there's a problem where if you time travel immediately after eating, you're going to leave a mess behind because the gravitite particles that I invented that allow time travel aren't in the food. And it might potentially leave it behind. And that was just something that's kind of gross and kind of inconvenient, actually. And it was fun for the first series, but I deliberately omitted that problem from the second series, From Time to Death. Like he will be having beers that aren't, treated for time traveling. And I'm just eliminating that. I'm making an executive decision as the writer that I'm no longer going to apply that rule going forward, because I want to take some license.
Exactly, and absolutely, and it's not really about that. There's a point at which I think you have to say to the readers, that's not really what's going on here. It reminds me, I think I've quoted him before, James Cameron, who constantly gets asked about the Titanic film, couldn't have Jack fitted on that bit of wood at the end of the film?
Right.
And his answer is, no, Jack couldn't. He drowned because it said in the script, Jack drowns. And it's a really, really good answer that explains how stories work.
Right.
And you're looking at the wrong thing here if you're worried about that. So anyway, that's part that for the moment. So that's really interesting, and I it's pleasing for me to hear, having just spent a long time, and you were part of that process for me of my first novel, which, as we speak, is now out into the wild. And I'm now moving on to my second novel. And
I meant to have your novel sitting right here. I forgot to grab it. I have the paperback copy. It's beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
It's a gorgeous looking book.
There's one on its way to you as well with a little autograph in it to say thank you. In fact, I don't know. You may even have. I don't know if your name is in the acknowledgements of the one you've got, or is it?
I saw my name in there.
It is good.
That was much appreciated.
Because I couldn't remember. There was a pre-production version where I didn't do the acknowledgements.
Back when you weren't liking my feedback? Like,
no, not then. I loved your feedback. It was an important step on the process. But obviously, my next book, I'm looking forward to my next book being a quicker process. And I had a chat with the editor this morning. I've done a 3,000 word outline for it. I know the areas I need to develop development-wise before I go into writing. I've drafted 30,000 words of it, or 40,000 actually already. But the bits I know I need to do, and it's going to be a quicker process for me. I don't like the idea that the rumination that took place over 4 or 5 years is not going to be there for book 2 and is going to show. Do you find that you're just better at forming the story and the characters? You get more efficient at it as you go on? You don't need 5 years each time, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, you don't need 5 years. However, it depends on your process. And I'm one of those people. I took the Becca Syme course. I did the, test and figured out how my own brain works. And I am very high in intellection, which is one of those things that says you do have to go wander off with the dog for a while and think about stuff before you come back to the page. And I've tried various ways of writing, for example. I've tried dictation. I've tried learning to type faster. And for me, the problem of getting faster is not the physical aspect of getting the keys pressed or getting the words on the page. It's the process of getting from my brain to my mouth or from my brain to my fingers. That's the slowdown is the time I take to think through the sentence before I put it on the page. And so it's different for different writers. Some writers can sit down and, bang out 6,000 words, and that's just the way their brains work because they have enough of it fully developed in their heads, or they're able to process through it on the fly. And for me, it's not that way. For me, I come up with a much better book if I take time to sit there and think about it when I'm doing other things, if I'm coming to the page with an idea of what I'm already doing. And when I hit a wall, I may as well stop because I don't know the answers. So just continuing to hurl myself against this blank page isn't going to produce the best work. Sometimes I'll do it. Yeah. Sometimes I'll just say, okay, well, I'm here, I'm writing, today's a writing day. I'm going to sit there and keep writing. But I know that those scenes are probably going to be revised. I have one actually just before we got on this call, I was going back and fixing a scene that I wrote a couple of days ago because of the fact that I realized I had veered away from the central theme of the story.
Right.
And sort of the premise of the world, that people were absorbed in technology in this particular world and they weren't paying attention to real life and human connection. And the theme, like the core of the story, is about human connection and how this particular detective, solves this case in conjunction with that theme of the story. I recently read a book by Lisa Cron, which was really good, where she talked about the third rail. I know we've discussed this a little bit too. I think the third rail of your story is that theme. It's that premise, that basic premise, where every scene you write has to touch on that third rail.
It's like the DNA.
It is. And I realized that I'd written this scene. I was having fun with it, blah, 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 just going along, creating stuff on the fly. And then great scene. Then I turned around and looked at it in context of the entire story and said, okay, this actually paints the opposite picture. This is showing an interactive group of people. That's not the point of the story. These people need to be disconnected. So I went back and rewrote. It wasn't a big rewrite.
Yeah. So unless you're doing that as a deliberate counterpoint to your theme, so like the exception proves the rule, it's a mistake to include it in there because it's going to be, yes, it is. It's a bit like,
and most people may not notice the first time they're reading. They may just be reading through the scene, sure. But then at the end, something wouldn't quite ring true. Like this basic premise that, what you're trying to present, you've undermined it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I love those dog walks where you're ruminating on it, and then it can take a couple of days sometimes, can't it? You know that there's a problem, and suddenly you get it. Usually miles from home where you can't write, but you have to rush back. What is let's talk about process a little bit, Nathan. I'm always interested in the nitty gritty. When do you write and how do you write? And we should say that you are, by choice, a part-time author, right? And we'll talk a little bit about the benefits of that, but what's your writing process first?
So I'm full-time self-employed, which helps. I run multiple businesses, but I am my own boss on both fronts, which is very helpful. So I do have somewhat of a control over my schedule, but I also realize that can be part of the problem as well. I recently read a book, which I was recommended by a mutual friend. Our mutual friend, Lucy Score, read Atomic Habits recently by James Clear. And I just listened to it. I was actually listening to it again this morning. And it talks about the daily habits we use to become who we want to become. And it's an amazing book. I highly recommend it to any writer because it can improve almost anyone. But one of the things that I identified in there was a productivity issue that I have, which is not having a very specific place and time all the time to write. And that's one of the things I really want to focus on this year. And it's been obviously derailed by COVID and having kids home from school. And my wife's now working from home, which really throws me off. And because my original process was fantastic. I'd go to the airport in the morning. I do my other job where I proctor exams for people who want to become aircraft mechanics. And then I would give myself a nice 3-hour lunch break. I would go to a taco shop, sit down, have some tacos, and then I would sit there and write for a couple of hours. Get that done, head back to the airport, do another exam, go home, deal with the kids and the family stuff. And then at night, I'm a bit of a night owl. Let's sit down and read and write some more. And it was phenomenal, fantastic. So that has been derailed a bit in this past year because of work from home scenarios, not being able to go to restaurants and sit inside for hours. So I've had to adapt, and I don't think I've adapted especially well. My productivity has gone down, although I did put out 3 things last year, which was great.
Yeah, that's really good.
But I think it's about finding that time to set aside. I have to actually put a lot in order to process out. Like for me, I realized I was hit in a bit of a wall recently. So my process partly involves sitting down to read at night, reading in my genre. So I've been reading a lot of detective novels lately. I very much am a processor of like what goes in comes out. So I've been watching even the TV I'm watching. If I let myself watch TV, I make sure that it's kind of on genre. Classic old detective stuff. I'm watching, I've watched Blade Runner 2049 several times because it's that futuristic PI detective. So the more I can just put it in my head, the easier it is to get out. But I do find it's especially good to do it in the written word. I've been reading a lot of Robert B. Parker novels lately because of the fact that his language is the language that I want to emulate. His Spencer books are very similar to the type of PI detective that I want to write. So I went down to the local bookstore, picked up a bunch of used paperbacks that were, next to nothing, a couple bucks a paperback. And I've just been scattering them around the house so that I always have an opportunity to sit down, even if it's just for a little bit. I have some Elmore Leonard on the shelf that sometimes I'll just pick him up. You don't have to read a lot of it. You just have to pick it up in just a couple pages, even, where you kind of get in the flow of the way these writers speak, the punchiness of the dialogue, the lack of frills, and how they just sort of immerse you right in there. And that part gets me excited about writing, not just about the genre, but just the actual physical act of wanting to make sentences that good. And that's been really fun. I think that's been a really cool part of this process of switching genres, of going from just a general fiction, adventure writing, which is, action packed and all that. But when you pare it down to PI detective is very sparse. It's if you've got 10 words in a sentence, you need to make it 6, preferably 5. So you're going through with a machete, just hacking out useless words every time you go in to edit a page, and just, punching people right in the gut. And that's the fun thing about this genre. That's just fascinating to learn.
And do you write?
And I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah, I can tell you, immersing yourself in it. And duo is a great genre. Mm-hmm. Do you write? You obviously write on a computer. Almost nobody writes longhand anymore. You use Scrivener, and what's your process? Do you just draft without going back, or you said today you've gone back over a scene from 2 days ago? I am
a paper and pen sort of scribbler when it comes to outlining. Like you can see, I've got like these like legal pads that are just full of nonsense on them, and especially if I get stuck, I like to hand write out what happens in the story. I'll just go back to the beginning of the story. Like, all right, such and such happens. It creates this problem. What question does it ask? And then I'll just kind of circle the questions as I go. At least this is my process right now for mysteries, because mysteries are such a other puzzle to solve. And I'll just keep working my way through to the point where I am now in the story. And then I'll keep writing and say, okay, and then what happens? And then what happens? And then what happens? Just the short form version, the 1-sentence scenes, to try to get the whole 40 scenes out. Because I know in my head, okay, I want to write 40 scenes roughly. And I'm trying to keep them short, 1,500 words for this genre. I want to end up with a 60,000 word book. That's my goal. So the more I can pare those 1,500 word scenes back down to this 1 sentence, the easier that's going to be. So at the end of this outline, I should have roughly 40 sentences that tell me what scenes are going to happen. It doesn't always work. Sometimes I'm hitting sentence 25 and I'm staring at a blank line because I don't know what happens then. And I have to sit there to figure that out.
Yeah. Well, that length, that's a very typical length for a kind of noir detective. Mm-hmm. I mean, I can remember the old paperbacks, pulp paperbacks, when they're quite thin.
Yeah.
Although I noticed that's changed a bit for you, because I was looking at one of your early books. Is it the Chronathon?
Mm-hmm. That was 200,000 words. Yeah,
that's a long book.
Dense.
I don't know why I scrolled down to look at the page count, and I went, what? 693.
Yeah, that was early on. That was my second book. And I think early on, I was like, well, will I even ever write another book after this? I don't know. I think I threw every
so you put everything into
time travel trope into one book. Someone called it the sampler of time travel, because it's got
that sampler menu.
It's a fun story. It's still to this day my bestseller and the most popular novel in my collection, because of the fact it does so much.
And it's sort of YA as well. Would you? I saw that.
Maybe not really new adult. It can fit in there if you want. Okay. There's not a lot of swear. I would rate it PG-13 action adventure.
Yeah,
but it's not necessarily designed for young adults. I write the books that I want to read.
Yeah.
So I'm usually my own target audience. And in this case, it was a time travel adventure race where the Chronathon is a marathon for time travelers. So they get sent back in time and have to race through different levels of history, real history, and then also into the future.
Well, collecting something to prove they've been there, or
right, exactly. You have to get there, get an item, return it to the time
Sounds
gate,
great.
get through the next. It's so much fun. I had a blast writing it. It was such a cool premise, and nobody had really done it yet. I was really surprised because I'm like, there has to have been a time travel adventure race at some point. And I looked around, couldn't find it. So it was okay. Well, this is basically The Amazing Race, but through time. And it was just a really fun premise. Of course, it gets subverted by bad guys, and ends up being a lot more going on.
So, my psychologist couch, is there a reason, do you think, Mr. Van Coops for time travel. I watched About Time the other night, which I'd not seen before. It's a rom-com that has some time travel element, and it was mentioned in our little authors group that we chat in. It was recommended, and I really enjoyed it. It's a really fun film, but it's very, very obvious as it's going on, and it's spelt out rather clunkily, I thought, at the end of what you're supposed to think, and you're supposed to think you don't take enough time to enjoy the day. So the big,
and the time travel shouldn't really be necessary.
No, the big secret was he used time travel to live the same day again, even a mundane day. And this time he noticed the butterfly and he noticed the smile on the person who served him, and he took time to comfort a colleague who he didn't notice at first was having a tough time in a meeting, and that lifted his life immensely, immeasurably lifted his life. His father sort of gave him this wisdom. So that was a rather clunky way of saying that's what time travel was doing in that story. Right. Is there a reason, do you think, for you wanting time travel? Is there, what is it about it that attracts you? It's clearly a strong theme with you.
That's interesting. And I think there's several reasons. One is actually probably tied to some of the themes of that film, where there was a very strong relationship between that main character and his father.
Yes.
Throughout that. And it was a huge moment for him when he had to decide whether to move on into the future, because there was a premise in the time travel where if he continued to have more children, he couldn't go back before the birth to visit his father, who was passing away. So in order to have a future, he had to say goodbye to his past. And that included saying goodbye to his father, which was the strongest relationship in the story, was that connection he had. And I think that was I think that's the heart of the story there. It was a rom-com. The romance is good.
Yeah,
but I think the actual...
It was a father-son film, yeah.
Yeah, that father-son element was absolutely the strongest. And for me, that's probably a lot of me goes back to the fact that I lost my father when I was a child. I was not quite 3 years old when he passed from cancer. And it was, that can't help but change you.
Yeah.
And of course, if I could time travel, the first place I would go would be straight back to talk to him, because who else can compare than your dad. So that's always there, is that element of otherness, of connection to the past, connection to a piece of you that exists only in the past.
Yeah. But
I also am a bit of a futurist as well. I really enjoy looking forward to the future, imagining what things will be like. I'm an optimist about the future. Typically in the time travel that I write, I don't write necessarily dark, depressing futures. There are some, apocalypses and things like that go on, but I write a multiverse as well. So there's infinite possibility, where when you open this door of time travel and walk through it, there's an infinite amount of good things that can happen as well as bad things. Granted, you can fling yourself off the planet into space and forget about the fact that the Earth's moving and accidentally die of asphyxiation, but that can happen to you. But there's also a lot of other really good stuff. And I wanted to create this world where all those infinite possibilities were there. I think that's something to think about too when you're first starting out a series, of where it can go, what kind of potential it can have. And I often use the example of, J.K. Rowling or anyone who writes fantasy says, okay, the basic premise you have to accept is magic is possible. And then if you answer that question, or if you accept that, okay, magic is possible, therefore what else is possible? And she did, I think, the most amazing job of creating a whole culture around it. She created clocks that tell you where your kids are. She created, dishwashers that washes themselves, the dishes wash themselves. Like, the magic was practical. And I think that was fascinating to me. And when I wrote this, I wanted the same kind of thing for time travel. I didn't want time travel to be just some big machine in a laboratory somewhere where people go through it, and that's the only time they time travel. Same thing with, time travel romance is a big genre. People have some hand waving of magic. You go to some Celtic, sacred spot, vanish back through time to the old days, and then you have a whole romance there and you come back. Like, time travel is not the main theme of the story in that. It's a time travel story, but it's just a means to an end. We're using time travel as a vehicle. Even Back to the Future, as much as I love it, is that type of story where he goes from present day to 1955, has the entire adventure there in a sort of wave of nostalgia for the viewer, and then comes back at the end. But what fascinated me about that series wasn't that particular storyline, but it was the car. It was the possibility of but you have a time traveling car. You don't just have to go to the 50s. You could go anywhere you dang well please. And that sort of little seed of imagination was huge for us as viewers watching those films. It's not what's on the page. It's not what's on the film. It's what's left in your imagination at the end.
Well, that's the same with the stories, isn't it? What it does. I mean, so iconic, of course, Back to the Future. My son is 15 and at lunch today kept showing me pictures of DeLoreans for sale. $21,000 for a right-hand drive in America, and they said for $60,000 you get one completely kitted out in Back to the Future. He's 15. This film was 1985 when it was. What I like about Back to the Future, what I think is really interesting about Back to the Future is that if you look at it from a story point of view, character arcs, it's the father's journey, isn't it? It kind of he's a sort of passive recipient of things that happen to him, but he's the person who changes through the actions in the film, not really Marty, who's more or less the same at the beginning and the end. But well, that's really, thank you for sharing that, Nathan. I think the good stories help us navigate life, don't they? I think that's what they say. One of the reasons people, it's not so much escapism. It's helping you make sense of things that have happened to you and are going to happen to you in life. And there's no doubt that, the superhero one, I think, is the kind of feeling of powerlessness that you have, and that these big jock thugs and everyone else seems to have all the power, and suddenly Spider-Man, Peter Parker and stuff, and that's a very real feeling that most of us have, because most of us aren't those big alpha males who look like they're going to achieve everything in their lives. And it makes sense psychologically why teenagers especially gravitate to that genre of superhero, because that is the most powerless time of your life, where your parents are dictating everything to you, your school is dictating everything, but you feel like you should have some power and autonomy. And that's exactly the time superhero fiction works so well. Yeah, we still feel it. Adults, interestingly, in time travel, there's a whole subgenre of time travel where it's revisiting the past, which is more popular, obviously, for the older readers. People who are, replay, Sean Inman's books, his Middle Falls series. It's all about what happened if I died and went back and got to live my life over again. What would I do differently then? That's a whole other subgenre of time travel. A lot of people don't realize how many different little subgenres there are to try to write in. But that one's incredibly popular because we all have that fantasy on some level of what would I do differently. And frankly, time travel is such an intriguing prospect that it's universal. I would say almost universal appeal, which is why it's in so many different, romance and thrillers and horrors and everything else, comedies. Time Traveler's Wife, which is ultimately a romantic book, and time traveling, that is an affliction, isn't it? It's a disease the guy has, that he can't control, and is potentially, and spoiler alert, is in fact fatal on occasions. But interesting. Anyway, so that's great. Well, I've really enjoyed it, and I look forward to. I don't know if I'm going to start Chronothon this year, because there's only a few months left of the year. 8 months left. I'll keep giving you the shorter ones that are the new Time of Death series stuff is a little easier to process. I'm definitely up for the next one. I really enjoyed it, and that that's just say that time travel. I'm a big believer too that if you're going to try out an author's work, you should try out their most recent stuff, because it's going to be their best stuff. Arguably, every book you write should be better than the one you wrote before. So if you really want to see what an author is capable of, I think you should try to read their most recent book. And judge it on that. That's easy with me. It's just the one so far. Now, the part-time aspect of this, so we used to say you work in aviation, and you and I have been flying. You've taken me flying. You're a qualified flying instructor, I think, you're QFI? Yep, that's right. And we went up with Margaret Lashley, I think, in the back of your Cessna 150, I guess, 152. It was a 172. 172, yeah. 172. And flew around beautiful St. Petersburg with blue skies and fluffy white clouds, and it was gorgeous. And is that an important part of you as a writer as well, having that stepping away from writing and doing something else, whether it's flying or the mechanical engineering testing stuff that you do? Do you think that helps your writing, having those two sides to your life? I think it helps me as a person, having those two sides to my life. I don't know that it necessarily informs the writing that much. Early on, it did. One of my first ideas for a story came to me while flying rather. I was flying around the Beltway in Baltimore. I used to be a traffic patrol pilot when I was young. Wow. And there was a balloon that drifted by at my altitude at 1,400 feet. Because balloons don't just keep going up. They stop at some point. They just drift around up there. What sort of balloon? Like a hot air balloon with people, or a small balloon? No, a helium balloon, like a birthday party balloon. Someone had let go.
And it was just sitting up there based on the density altitude. They go up different altitudes and then they just sort of hover around and then eventually come down in the ocean and kill turtles. So don't let go of your balloons. No. It's not good for the environment. But it was interesting because I saw it drifting by and it just, I was bored. I was spending 5 hours a day at the plane at that point, and it was not exciting work. It was my very first job as a pilot. And my mind wandered off to like, well, what if there was more stuff up here? What if there was people living up in the sky? What would that be like? And that became the seed of an idea that eventually became my book, Faster Than Falling. And that was the first book I ever wanted to write. And it was too much for me to write though. At the time I wasn't a good enough writer. And I went and wrote the Times Like These series first and then jumped into Faster Than Falling. And again, I'm super proud of that book, but it's one of these off-world, kind of out there genres, steampunk sky pirate adventure that also incredibly difficult to market.
Another Nathan MASH fusion.
It is. But I'm incredibly proud of it. The narrator did a fantastic job. She's a Emmy Award nominated narrator. I'm sorry, Grammy Award, not Emmy. Grammy Award nominated narrator, and she did an amazing job with it. But getting back to the idea of flying, it's not necessarily just flying, but flying is a passion for me. I've been flying since I was a teenager. I soloed in a plane before I could drive a car, so it's always been there at the core of kind of who I am. But
I was just thinking, I suppose, about moving away and doing something different. I mean, I remember when I learned to fly when I was in my 30s. I had a very stressful job as a BBC reporter. It's kind of nasty, not nasty, but the atmosphere was always one. You didn't take your eyes off your back and your front, and flying was like going on holiday because it was a completely different world. It's completely immersive. Your life depends on you concentrating and getting things right. You did quite a lot of solo flying in your last 20 hours of your 40 hours PPL. And I'd come away from that like I'd been on holiday, completely refreshed. And I just wondered if there was that element to you, just stepping away from that. We've got friends who write all day, and I think they have to really work at not writing all day.
Exactly. Yeah. Because, there's more to life. I mean, I'm going to drop a little bit of hot truth here. It's that, writing isn't the only gig. It's as much as we mythicize it and say that, being a full-time writer is a goal. It is for a lot of people, but it's not for everyone. And in my case, I've realized that I'm a much happier person with multiple elements of myself being able to be expressed. And the creative side of me is definitely one part of my brain. But like you said, there's that whole other side of my brain that's much more, technical. And the aviation side is, decision-making. And it's a different feeling. It's a physical transportation of yourself and seeing the world. And I just love the feeling of dropping into an airport somewhere, going to have lunch and not having a car there. People are like, well, how'd you get here? Well, I dropped out of the sky.
Yeah.
That's like that's a possible thing.
The $200 hamburger, they call it, don't
they? Exactly. And it does inform your writing in that it does refill the well a bit. It fills your life up. So there's so many jobs out there that can do this. And I'm a big believer for a lot of reasons in not just putting all your eggs in one basket, for one thing, financially. I'm in a very fortunate position where my aviation business floats the whole boat most of the time, financially. Like, I don't have to write for money. And it does give me the freedom to try these oddball genres and mashups and to write what I want to write because I'm not really dependent on the income. And it's really nice to be able to just take all the income from writing and just put it right back into the business again and just use it to run ads or covers or get really good, narrators, things that I want to spend it on. And actually, my new goal this year, my wife has finally signed on to buying an airplane. Oh, so wow! Eventually my book writing business is going to buy me a plane. That's my new goal.
A G4.
So it's good to have financial goals, but it's not. It's also good to have stability and have multiple sources of income. Not be all dependent on Amazon and readers and just life. Obviously, 2020 happened, and with kids home, my writing pace has gone down, my revenue has gone down. But I know that that's fine. Like, I'm not stressed about it because I'll still be writing in 5 years. Yeah, because I'm not. Yeah, I've got something else, and I'm not stressed about it. It also gives me the freedom to write the way I want to write and to, explore new things, explore new genres, like just play around and have fun as a writer.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. People should think about that. I think if you don't, there may be a balance. You don't have to think, I've got to quit this job and be a full-time writer. That's what I want to do. You maybe wind down that job to 1 or 2 days a week, or find a different career where you can do that and do writing. And it just takes the pressure off writing as well. Because it could quickly stop being fun in those early days if you're fretting that much about your income every month from writing. So, yeah.
And I love what I do. So it's not a grind for me. And there's a lot of people who have very fulfilling roles. And maybe you're a nurse. Maybe you only work 3 days a week. You work 3/12s or something like that. But what you do is actually really important and provides, help to people and is a service to society in a way that's really important. So we don't necessarily want you to quit doing that. There are other people who are working a grind, a 9 to 5, and that they just hate it. And then absolutely those people, if you can make a full-time living writing and jump ship and be your own boss, go for it. Absolutely. But that can also be, like you said, that can also be a grind. I know some writers who have jumped into this writing space, and it seems like they just strap themselves to a millstone.
Yeah, it's quite.
And they're just going around and around, just grinding it out. And they can't get off this wheel now, because you have the pace of writing. Sometimes it's like, well, you got to keep producing. I got to put out a book every other month or something like that, just to stay on top of this Amazon algorithm. And it's exhausting. And the burnout rate, I think the burnout rate has already gone up because, we've seen it over the past few years. And one of the benefits of being around since 2013, which seems like early days, even though there was, many people in traditional and earlier indie times, but I've seen the trends come and go. I remember when I first put out the Chronothon, people were saying, oh, no, you absolutely got to break this up into a serial. Everybody's doing serials now. And there were a bunch of serials out. They're like, you got a 200,000 word book? Absolutely not. No, you got to break it up into like 4 parts, and you're going to sell each one for 99 cents or $1.99. There was a whole different system of tactics around back then. You don't see people doing that anymore. That didn't last. I knew, though, that I'm like, I like reading a book that ends at the end. I don't want to have to read the next book to enjoy this one. So I'm going to put out this 200,000 word doorstopper. But you know what? It's made me a ton of money on Audible. So like that series has actually really worked out because I made that decision and didn't just go with the trend of serializing novels.
Yeah.
So you have to have a long game mentality. You have to think, okay, I want this career to be here in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years. I can't just hop on every bandwagon as it goes by and then expect to see success. That's one thing that I will say that I've made that mistake of flip-flopping a little too much sometimes, where, okay, I'm gonna pull out a Kindle KU and go wide, and then I'm gonna jump back in, or things like that. And usually shifting gears causes a decrease in productivity or in revenue more so than staying the course on a particular thing. But you live and learn. So and it helps to have other author friends who obviously you can get together and share these things with, learn from. That's one of the other huge thing that's developed over the years is just the relationships of having the peers in the industry over the years who you've kind of come up with and moved on with. And then you keep up those relationships. It's huge.
It's huge. And it's so enjoyable. And we all have those days when we need it and can support each other and so on. And it does make me think about the authors from 20 years ago and beyond, great authors who probably lived pretty solitary lives. There wasn't the infrastructure to have chats, but you and I and a couple of our friends chew the breeze over books and writing and silliness over a beer every few weeks, and it's a really enjoyable. I know lots of people have these little groups. It's keeps us going.
And if you don't, I highly recommend it, because I think there's some sort of difficulty with the anonymity of giant groups. Like if you're in a giant Facebook group, I mean, you just went through this recently too, with you put your blurb up and you put your blurb out there, and you get 300 comments of differing opinions of everyone. Like sometimes there's too much feedback, and it's overwhelming when you have that size of a group, of a community. You need some of these little small groups and to have discussions with, because it's actually more productive. And
six is a good number, around the 6 point, a little bit more, a little bit less, but I think it's a good number.
I agree.
Nathan, look at that, time has zipped past. time has, I mean, we can't go, unfortunately, unless we're in one of your novels, we can't go back and redo any of this. That's it. We're time travelers, but we're moving at the speed of the clock forward. That's how it works, isn't it? Unless we go into space and travel near the speed of light, then it all changes. Time travel is possible.
Yeah. But till then, and we're going to time travel right now, this episode, we're going to send this episode into the future.
It is. It's going to be going out in the future, which is weird.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Such fun talking to you, Nathan. Well done on your career and your books. I've enjoyed it. So I would say thank you for entertaining me. And what's next? You're doing more of the Time of Death series?
I am. Yeah. I'm working on a really fun sort of a little bit more cyberpunk flair to it, but still same detective.
And there's a muscle car in there, the Beast.
You got to have a cool car. All the 70s detectives have the best cars. Magnum had one in the 80s, of course, and there's always got to be a cool car involved.
There's got to be. There's got to be a cameo from a DeLorean at some point in there.
All right, I'll slip that in.
Yeah, it's got to be done. Nathan, thank you so much indeed.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
There you go. There's Nathan. He's got a great voice as well, Nathan, I think. And there's I don't know if you play PGA Y2K Golf on the Xbox. No. But the guy who does the commentary, I'm sure it's Nathan. Sounds exactly like it. I mean, a lovely interview and a very poignant moment I thought about a lot when Nathan talked about having lost his father when he was very young and how he writes time travel. I found it very moving moment in the interview. A lovely guy and somebody who I know from the conversations I've had with Nathan about my book, and he talks to Boo Walker about his book, and Boo's an excellent writer. Nathan's very thoughtful about story, whether it works, whether it doesn't work, and is one of these authors who soaks up a lot of that thinking in that area and talks about it a lot. And that comes through with his book. I thought his book was incredibly well paced. He's got pacing done very well, and quite a short book as well. I think it's a bit of a trend these days, shorter books, not for me, but for others. Making great guns. And most of all, Mark, not somebody who thinks, well, I've got to be Mark Dawson next year. I've got to get myself a 7-figure income. I've got to quit my 9-to-5. Somebody who's very happy with the role that writing plays in his life, which is supplementary income and a hobby that goes beyond, a hobby that pays for itself and gives him profit, but also doesn't interfere with the fact that he's got a career in aviation, which he's very keen on.
Yeah, and that's completely fine. I mean, there's lots of reasons why you'd want to be a writer. I mean, the most important one should be that you enjoy writing, and there's no need to. That's more than good enough. I've often said I would continue to write if someone told me that I'd never sell another book. I'd just do it because I love writing. It's the thing I've always enjoyed the most. So if you can, if that's your reason, that's perfectly legitimate, and you should write and continue to write and enjoy yourself. If you want to be like Nathan and supplement your income, that's completely legitimate. And if you want to set a goal to go full time and make this your career, also completely legitimate. It doesn't really matter. And one of the things I think it's important to. If you kind of look in some of the big Facebook groups, it is difficult sometimes to avoid the suggestion that it's all about money, and people posting their income results. I mean, I don't do that anymore, but people doing that, nothing wrong with it, I don't think. I think if taken correctly, it can be really great motivation. But you shouldn't feel bad if you're selling a couple of books a day, or if you're selling no books a day. That's there's nothing wrong with that. It's if that's not what you want, and clearly Nathan enjoys buzzing around the skies of Florida, and has taken up authors before. And in fact, I think whenever Nink comes around, he usually has a kind of an authors in the air afternoon, which I've always ducked out of because I'm terrified he's going to crash. Although he probably isn't going to crash.
Probably not.
So, I should probably do it next time, but he's taking people out there, and I think it's lovely. And he clearly has a life he enjoys, got a young family. He's a really nice guy, so good luck to him.
Yeah, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with authors publishing their results, and I always learn something from them, whether they're making gazillions or they've made their first 5-figure month or 4-figure month even. I always look at the blurb, the covers, how they've marketed. I think that's a really good thing that we do in this industry that probably doesn't really happen in traditional publishing. I can't see Simon & Schuster publishing their detailed marketing results to share and help their competitors, but it is something that we do. Good. And also, final shout out to Tom Ashford, who came up with a great title for this week's podcast, Part-Time Writer, Full-Time Traveller, which I thought was a very clever.
Mm-hmm. He's a clever lad.
It's almost like he's a young Tom that could be a writer if you just put his mind to it. Yeah. Good. Okay, look, thank you very much indeed, particularly to Nathan for sharing everything that he did with us today. Lovely to chat to him. We'll be back next week on the Self-Publishing Show. All that remains for me to say is it's a goodbye from him.
And a goodbye from me.
Goodbye.
Get show notes, the podcast archive, and free resources to boost your writing career at selfpublishingshow.com. Join our thriving Facebook group at selfpublishingshow.com/Facebook. Support the show at patreon.com/selfpublishing show. And join us next week for more help and inspiration so that you can make your mark as a successful indie author. Publishing is changing, so get your words into the world and join the revolution with the Self-Publishing Show.